Thank you for joining today's webinar, Designing Facades for Parking Facilities, where beauty, safety, and security merge. I'm your moderator, Jocelyn Fagan. As you know, the parking industry is growing. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are an estimated 105 million commercial parking spaces in the United States. And with this growth comes an increasing need for multiple-story parking garages. Today, W.S. Tyler is joined by a panel of experts to discuss designing facades for multi-story parking garages, including what products can create a desirable aesthetic, information on safety and security considerations, and what owners look for, and more. Now I would like to introduce you to our panelists. Wendy DeCapit, Sales Manager, Architectural Products for W.S. Tyler. Wendy has been with W.S. Tyler for 13 years. She began her career with the company as a customer service representative in the laboratory equipment industry and was quickly promoted to start up W.S. Tyler's USA Architectural Design Wirecloth Department. For the past 11 years, Wendy has been working hard to educate and introduce the architectural community to this exciting new design option. Customer-driven best describes the energy Wendy brings to projects she becomes involved in. She is currently working on developing W.S. Tyler's Green program, highlighting the environmental advantages of designed metal wire mesh. Her project list is impressive and includes large parking garage facades, design interior cladding, and creative metal sculptures. Thanks for participating today, Wendy. Next, I'd like to introduce Marcy Marrow. Marcy is the editor of Metal Architecture and Metal Construction News magazines for Modern Trade Communications. She previously worked in the newspaper industry, doing everything from ad design and marketing to writing and editing. Marcy is knowledgeable about construction, architecture, new home building, green building, architectural products, and manufacturing. Marcy is also active on social media and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and blogging for metal architecture. Thank you for joining us today, Marcy. Our third panelist is Mr. Stephen Rabora. Steve is the president of Desmond Associates, which specializes in the design, restoration, and planning of parking structures. He is a licensed architect and has been an integral part of the parking design and planning industry for over 25 years. As such, his works have been published by the NPA, the Urban Land Institute, and Architectural Record magazine. Steve is also an active member of the National Parking Association's Parking Consultants Council. During his tenure with Desmond, he has been involved with hundreds of projects which have largely focused on the design of new parking structures. Thanks for being here, Steve. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce John Creech. John is a project architect with Elliott & Associates Architects and oversees many projects from inception to construction to completion. John graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a bachelor's in architecture. After working at a small firm out of college, he joined Elliott & Associates in September 2004. John has designed and completed 77 field office complexes located in 12 states, including Oklahoma, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Texas. He was on the architectural team of the award-winning Car Park 2 at Chesapeake Energy and is also a member of the team that renovated the Kirkpatrick Oil Company offices in Oklahoma City. Kirkpatrick Oil Hennessy was honored with an American Architecture Award from the Chicago Museum, Interior Design Best of the Year, and honor awards from the AIA Central States Region, AIA Oklahoma, and AIA Central Oklahoma organizations. Currently, John is the lead role and coordinator for the development of 7 Chesapeake Energy Industrial Park Master Plans, which are comprised of multiple field office facilities and major site infrastructure improvements. John is also working on projects and developments within the Chesapeake Energy Oklahoma City campus, which includes a 567,000 square foot parking structure. Thanks for joining today, John. And now, let's get started. Our first question is, what challenges do you see in the industry in regard to parking facilities? Steve, why don't you take that one?
Sure, thank you. Probably the biggest challenge I've seen is that parking garages used to be architectural afterthoughts. Previously, garages were really stereotyped by architects and planners as a necessary evil. They took on the form of what I would call a background building. If it went unnoticed, you did your job well. I've always found this ironic in that, we spend our weekends washing and polishing our cars, and then as parking garage designers, we do everything all week long to hide them. But what's happening today is that land is becoming more expensive, less available, and businesses are relying more and more on customer service. So the role and function of the parking garage has really been redefined. The storage of cars has evolved into really a dominant land use in every city, university, hospital that we go on. Garages are really everywhere now. So the challenge we have as designers is that not only do we need to continue to consider parking as infrastructure, but now we need to look at the buildings as an aesthetic contributor to the overall experience. We are no longer designing background buildings.
Thanks, Steve. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that one? Or Steve pretty much covered it. Our next question is, what trends and fads are you seeing in terms of design and materials? Marcy, why don't you start with that one?
Okay, well, some of the projects that we see in the magazines tend to feature, obviously, a lot of metal products, and designers have lots of options. Things we see a lot in the magazine tend to be leaning towards metal mesh, which can be used for everything from transparency to controlling solar heat gain. It can be used to make a design statement on the structure's exterior, or even to conceal staircases. At night, LED lights have been used to create unique visual displays. Metal mesh has also been used to help conceal that the building was a parking garage, making it more look like an office building, or even to help it blend in with surrounding buildings. As a functional product, metal mesh has been used to allow natural light and ventilation to flow into the building, while also serving as a fall protection barrier. And then one of the parking garages we featured recently actually used louvers to address both sound and privacy issues, since it was located next to a hospital. And that louver system also allowed for light reflectivity and permeability while creating a unique facade for the garage. So that's just some of the things that we're seeing.
You mentioned metal mesh. Wendy, what else can you add on that topic?
Well, trends that we are seeing lately are incorporating paint into the design. W.S. Tyler actually pioneered the process of painting mesh, giving the owners and designers the option to add images or logos or other abstract images to the design itself. The paint, colors can be any shade within the REL spectrum, and the images can be as small as 2 inches. So anything that's real detailed can still be portrayed onto the mesh. And paint is an inexpensive way to add movement and flow to your parking structure, making it more unique as well as blending in with the surrounding neighborhood. Another trend we are seeing, which Marcy mentioned, is the use of LED lighting. Whether it's to add flashes of color to portray moving images across the entire mesh facade, we have developed a transparent media facade called iMagicWeave. The iMagicWeave system is a fantastic way to project live video, scrolling words, commercials, and pretty much anything that you could watch on a screen can be done with our iMagicWeave system. One of the benefits that we're seeing with the iMagicWeave system is the resale value of the space. Being able to sell that advertising space and recouping the cost. Your owners, once they're putting this iMagicWeave system, they can sell it to local companies to advertise, whether it's a commercial that they're looking at doing, or simply just putting their logo in there. These are just a few changes that we're seeing in the parking industry, and making the parking garages themselves stand out. Where they were 20 years ago, where you really never even noticed the parking garage because it was always in the back of the building.
Yeah, that's great. Steve, what else can you add on this topic?
I'll be glad to. Actually, Wendy, those are great examples. I found myself taking notes as you were just talking. I think I'm going to use some of them. Really, the context of what she's referring to is that we are continually put in a position where we need to provide highly architectural facade solutions for the least cost possible. I don't know if I would really call it a fad, because I don't expect this to change anytime soon, but it's good business to spend less if it doesn't affect the bottom line. People will always park based on convenience, not because of the color or appearance of the garage. However, as we talked about in the first question, these decks today that are being located at the front door of universities, hospitals, retail malls. The first thing that a patron experiences is sometimes this parking garage, and in these instances, the garage needs to become part of the overall campus mission. And in some some developments even act as a catalyst for activity. So these things that Wendy's talking about, some of these metal meshes, LED lighting, painting, all adds to that ambiance. The parking garage needs to be a good neighbor and not detract from the vitality of the development that it serves. And therefore, we're always looking for economical building materials that promote this type of thinking.
I agree, Steve. Parking garages are no longer the afterthought when designing a new hotel or hospital or parking mall. These are being pushed to the front of the entire project, and owners are wanting them to reflect or mirror the main building. I mean, bright, shiny mesh with paint and LEDs are a great way to achieve that by, making the structure stand out, or, making it actually, collaborate with the building itself that it's part of.
Those are good points. And that kind of leads into our next question is, what are the owners' concerns? What kind of things do they want to see incorporated into these types of facilities? Wendy, why don't you start that one off?
Some of the concerns that we're seeing with parking garages when they're being fully cladded, so to speak, is ventilation. Ventilation becomes a huge concern. We all know that there is a certain percentage of open area that needs to be met when designing parking structures that are fully cladded and making it more open. The mesh system itself, we're able to provide that ventilation by opening the mesh up larger or pushing it off the building, still giving you a closed-off parking structure or a fully cladded parking structure, but you don't have to worry any longer about the ventilation itself. The other concern that you have is a debris flying around. Depending on the area or the location of the parking structure, because the mesh is fully cladding all four sides of the building, you now no longer have the risk of airborne particles or airborne debris coming through and hitting the cars that are located inside the building. Those are just a few of the considerations or the concerns that we have when we're looking at parking structures.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay. Our next question talks about the environmentally responsible materials. How important are environmentally responsible materials in these types of facilities? Marcy, what are you seeing?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the client and the local building codes. Having a LEED certified parking garage is not a lot of people's high priority compared to schools and offices and hospitals and things like that. But it does happen. We have featured one of the first LEED certified parking garages. And in addition to utilizing metal mesh, it had sustainable features such as stormwater management, photovoltaic panels, energy efficient light fixtures, and landscaping that aided in gaining that LEED certification. But even without LEED certification, I think a lot of owners and contractors are finding it important to include environmentally friendly materials and products, and the durability and recyclability of metal products aid in it being used as a material for parking garages recently.
That's interesting. Now, kind of moving from materials into really the foundational elements of these projects. Steve, when you're approached with a project, where do you typically start?
Well, that's pretty easy. We always start with a program and a budget. With the parking garage, how many spaces, what is the site, what are the site constraints, who are the users, and of course, what is the budget? With that program in hand, we'll then look to develop a functional solution first. Circulation of vehicles and pedestrians are always the most important within a garage. How do we get people to their parking spaces? How do they get out of their car and then to their destination safely and efficiently? So once these pieces of the puzzle are laid out, then we can really start looking at aesthetics, massing, buildings, architectural character. We find that 50 to 60% of the garage cost is really the structural frame. So once you have that laid out, you know how much budget you have left to work with for the remaining building elements.
Great. Wendy, what do you think about this question?
Well, much like Steve, we're going to start with those same things. We ask a lot of questions. One of them is regarding budget. The other one is location. where is this parking structure located, what are going to be some of the technical challenges that we're going to have when they want to incorporate mesh. One of the main questions that we ask are, what are their aesthetic requirements? What are they looking for? What do they want this parking garage to do? Is it something where they're strictly just looking to clad the parking structure and leave it, like Steve had mentioned before, on the back side of the building? Or is this something that they want to look like a jewel or a diamond that's going to be attached to their main structure? And when we decide what that aesthetic requirement is, we can then move forward in choosing the mesh that's most appropriate for that application, as well as do we need to do any of those add-ons where we need to do the paint or when we need to do the iMagic Weave LED system. So there's a lot of questions that come in. And then, of course, the overall experience. What do they want the people that are going to be occupying that parking structure? Do they want it to be welcoming? Do they want it to be something where, you know, people have to pull into these parking structures every day when they're going to work? And typically, you know, maybe it's the first thing that they see as they're walking into the building, and maybe just adding a little bit more feature to it or a little bit more something exciting is going to help them maybe get through their day. You just never know. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of questions that you have to come through and ask. And again, it's just one of those things where you just kind of feel it out and figure out exactly what the owner of the building is looking for.
Great, thank you. What kind of building materials are most commonly used for these and why? John, why don't we start with you?
Okay. On the projects that I've worked on, we have used a number of materials for the exterior facade. Stainless steel mesh panels, polycarbonate panels, and aluminum composite panels. And basically, we're trying to achieve natural ventilation through the structure and allowing some daylighting into the structure to help reduce the lights that we might need. So we kind of experiment with different materials, and low maintenance is very important in the material. We don't want to have to go and paint, you know, the entire structure like every 5 years or anything like that. So we try to use things like stainless steel that will last forever in the relative sense. But so that's kind of the way that we look at that.
Great. Marcy, what are you seeing?
Well, in terms of the parking garage projects that we feature in the magazine, metal mesh is probably the #1 product we see for the facades, and it's used for everything from privacy to safety and aesthetics. But other than that, we've also featured projects that include colored glass panels, photovoltaics, metal wall panels, and louvers. So there's a variety of metal products that can be used on the exterior of parking garages. And things are, you know, people are becoming more and more creative with what they do in terms of design.
Yeah, definitely. Steve, what are you seeing?
Well, I certainly agree with the two of these guys that, you know, metal mesh, glass, and lighting tend to give a pretty dramatic architectural experience when it comes to garages. But still, the most commonly used facade material is going to be concrete, and this is largely because most garages are built out of concrete, whether that's cast-in-place concrete, you know, or precast. Precast concrete, there is a big difference in that needs to have a spandrel panel on the exterior that supports the T. And so whenever you're building with a precast system, you're automatically, you know, stuck with a concrete spandrel, to say. Now, that's not to say that can't be clad in other materials, and it often is, whether that's painted, covered in brick, or even metal in glass, as we've done. Cast in place tends to give us a much lighter edge, and in those instances, you can do almost anything. Again, back to these metal panels, you know, brick panels and brick spandrels that we go on. What we have seen, though, in terms of sustainability, one of the biggest goals is trying to increase the natural light into the garage, the daylighting. We need to increase that. And so by reducing a concrete spandrel and replacing it by glass or metal, it actually increases the natural daylight in the garage, obviously then reducing the need for lighting during the day and reducing the energy consumption. So that's where we see it headed today.
Thank you. Wendy, why don't we finish this question with you? What kind of materials are you seeing commonly used?
Well, because we are a woven wire mesh manufacturer, typically, obviously, what we're going to see most is going to be that stainless steel mesh. I can tell you that our stainless steel mesh is manufactured out of an architectural grade 316 stainless steel. And when we're talking architectural grade, basically that means that it's gone through a higher level of inspection. The biggest difference between an industrial grade and an architectural grade is the grain or the brush finish that's in those wires. So the architectural grade is going to typically be a smoother wire. So it allows the dirt or airborne particles to just simply let the rain wash those off, and it will remain shiny and bright through the life of the building. So again, just for us, typically everything that we're seeing or everything that we're manufacturing was going to be made out of an architectural grade 316 stainless steel. The other great attribute about using the stainless steel is that it's a recycled material. So it averages about a 60% recycled content, and then it will last the life of the building. It's very highly rust resistant, non-corroding, which also means that because it's made out of stainless steel, that if by chance anything were to happen to the parking structure and you were going to end up tearing it down, all of that stainless steel is 100% recyclable, which adds to the green or the LEED effect of the building itself.
Great, thank you all. So earlier we talked about how big the industry was growing, and we see it continuing to grow over time. John, where do you see the industry going in 5 or 10 years?
I would hope to see that it would be more integrated with like smart systems, like parking guidance systems. One of the projects that I'm working on right now, the company provides smartphones for all their employees, and they wanted to be able to find a parking spot on their phone before they even get to the parking garage, so they don't have to drive up and down all the ramps and then find out that there's no parking spaces available. So they wanted to be able to have an app on their phone that would tell them exactly, where the parking spot is that would be open. And I thought that was a pretty good idea. And doing a lot of research about it, I'm just trying to learn about it right now. There's not a whole lot of companies in the United States that offer things like that. As far as I'm getting into it, it's been hard to find information about that. So hopefully that would develop more in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like that.
And then one more thing on as far as the energy goes, it would, parking structures use quite a bit of energy for the lighting and mechanical systems if they need it, and it would be pretty ideal to have possibly all the energy being harvested from the building itself, like on the roof level, because they usually take up a pretty good sized footprint. So that would seem to be an easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I wanted to ask you, John, also, what are some of the common safety considerations taken when designing the parking structure?
A lot of the safety that we're concerned with is fall protection and vehicle barriers, just trying to avoid any situations where cars might interact with pedestrians walking through the garage, and just being in garages, coming in from the outside, you're sometimes blinded because of the light level changes, and just being aware of those things is probably the priority of the safety.
Mm-hmm. Steve, what about you?
Well, I could tell you that safety is always a major consideration when designing a parking facility. If people are uncomfortable, they just won't use it. The parking garages are massive buildings with relatively very little human activity when compared to a shopping mall or an office building in the same square footage. So, there's all kinds of active security systems, we would call it, like CC television cameras and intercom systems, etc., that you can kind of buy off the shelf and install, which we do utilize. However, what we find is the right design for safety it really starts with the physical environment. If you create a comfortable, user-friendly environment, then people will feel safer, and in fact they are. High headroom, when we can get away with it, and the elimination of any walls within the facility will give clear lines of sight and reduce or eliminate anywhere for the bad guys to hide. You know, this is especially true in the stair towers, the elevator towers, so people can be seen while they're waiting for an elevator or if they take the stairs. The design should promote natural daylighting, which will support that line of sight and eliminate dark spaces within the deck. So as we've been talking about today, the use of transparent facade materials, you know, light screening like metal mesh are great ways to achieve this as opposed to using concrete or brick walls around the perimeter. Again, this is particularly true in stair and elevator towers.
Thank you. Wendy, what are some of the most unique requests or projects you've seen?
Some of the more unique projects that we're seeing now are a 3D facade, where they're looking at either pushing the mesh in and out of the building, creating curves, creating rolls, creating movement with the mesh itself. So again, you don't have 4 straight walls or 3 straight walls, whatever it may be. So creating that flow or that movement with using mesh or whatever it may be is one of the new things that we're seeing. It's also a challenge when it comes to the technical aspect of that. Another one, obviously, that we're seeing now is painted. We've had a few projects now where they wanted to incorporate paint onto the mesh, whether it's making it a leaf pattern, such as we did at LAPD, whether it's making it an image or any sort of tree or whatever it may be, something more organic, maybe just to try and incorporate those features into the structure to make it more neighbor-friendly. Another challenge that we see are cutouts, such as we did over at Car Park 1 at Chesapeake, where they're making the cutouts into the mesh just to have an added architectural feature protrude itself through, such as a pole or a flag sign, whatever it may be. But those cutouts then create another technical challenge for us. Another one that we're working on right now is varied openings within the mesh panel, so you can have a more dense pattern at the bottom, something more open as it gets closer to the top. The great thing with having a varied opening is that if you wanted to have it more dense at the bottom to create more security, more protection, and then have it more open at the top, that openness at the top is now allowing for the ventilation concerns that the customer is having, tying back into the owner's concerns of the building by cladding it. So some of the, like I said, some of the more unique requests that we have are the 3D facades, adding movement, adding the paint to the building, and then, of course, our iMagically system, the LED system, putting the LEDs onto the mesh system.
Thank you. You mentioned the Chesapeake project. John, I know you're involved in Chesapeake too. What are some of the most unique projects or requests you've seen?
We had our client wanted us to build an underground parking garage and put a field on top so that, I guess, when it's all done, it just looks like a field. The challenge was we wanted to try to still have this structure classified as an open parking structure, which means that that natural ventilation is used versus mechanical ventilation. So that was a pretty big challenge with it being underground and all. But we were able to achieve that, and also we were, I think, 4 inches higher than what would be classified as an underground building, which also kicks in a lot of other code requirements like sprinkler systems and things. So that was a pretty good challenge, and it turned out really nice. What Wendy was mentioning was bringing back some fun memories about Car Park 2 with the challenges of doing the cutouts in the mesh panel. Those starting to remind me how much fun we had with that.
So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
The mesh panels are continuous full-height panels from top to bottom, and the cutouts on those. And in some cases, the poles were installed first, and it's like threading the eye of a needle by trying to put those mesh panels over those poles. So, but you know what? We in our industry, we keep saying that each parking garage is like a snowflake. Everyone is different. Everyone has its own little attributes, all of its own little features, and its own technical challenge, and that's something that we strive for.
Thank you, guys. So we've talked a lot about mesh and metal being used in parking facilities for the facade. Are you seeing it being used more often? Steve had mentioned some other materials. Is mesh kind of playing a stronger role in this? John, what are you seeing?
I think it is, because we've seen that the maintenance on the metal mesh seems to be a lot better, or the lack of maintenance is required seems to be a lot better than other materials. And I think when it comes down to it, it's, what's the life cycle cost of the facades, and it seems like the stainless mesh performs better in the long run than other materials, or it makes more sense financially.
Mm-hmm. Wendy, what about you?
Well, we have seen a steady growth in our industry over the past few years. What's nice is that we are able to take an otherwise ordinary building and turn it into a working piece of art. Because the mesh is so reflective, it creates a living building. You'll notice the blue sky, the oranges, reds, and yellows from the sun. The changing of the seasons will reflect off the mesh as well. Again, we're using an architectural grade 316 stainless steel. It's a very durable, very sustainable product. And as John mentioned, there's little to no maintenance involved with the mesh. Once the mesh panels are installed, you won't have to go back and retension them or clean them. The mesh will last the life of the building or the facility itself, and just continue to change. And every time you walk past it, you may get a different reaction to the mesh or a reaction from the mesh as well.
That's good. Now, this is our last question. If you could share one piece of advice with another designer or consultant in this industry, what would it be? John, why don't I start with you?
I would just say to try to simplify as much as possible, because these garages, for someone that's not familiar with them, they can get pretty complicated as far as the systems and everything that's involved. And the more simple the things are, I think the better everything turns out in the end.
Mm-hmm. Wendy, what about you?
I would have to agree. One of the things that we say is get us involved as soon as possible. The earlier that we are involved, the more recommendations or the more technical information that we can offer to have a either smooth application, a smooth installation, any sort of questions regarding how our mesh is going to tie into the substructure. We're able to answer those questions a lot sooner. We have engineers on staff that can supply structural calculations in order to be able to pour their concrete embeds and be able to have the substructure attached to the building as soon as possible, or have it designed, I should say, as soon as possible, so there's no guesswork or there's no surprises at the end. So again, the sooner that we can get involved with a project, whether it's just an idea, the better off we all are.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would simply say that parking garages are a sophisticated building, and it's in everybody's best interest to hire a parking consultant as part of the team early on.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with Steve.
Well, thank you all. We had some questions submitted, and so I'm going to kind of go through those as well. Our first question is for Wendy. Do you all provide installation, and if not, how is it installed and by whom?
We have a network of approved installers across the country that we work very closely with. These are typically going to be your miscellaneous metal subcontractors, your curtain wall installers, people of that industry. The mesh will arise in full height panels. These panels are hoisted to the top of the building and attached to the substructure. The crane will then slowly lower those panels, and they are attached to the bottom of the structure. Once those are installed, we actually let them sit or rest for about 24 hours and then come back and do our final tensioning and attach the intermediate connections as well. And typically for an installation, cladding a full parking garage usually takes about 4 to 5 days, depending on the size of the garage and depending on the technical issues, if there are any that we're going to need to deal with on site, such as if there's cutouts that we need to pay attention to, or if there's any sort of curving or rolling of those panels that we need to, if we're wrapping a facade, so to speak. So typically, like I said, it's about 4 to 5 days to install a full cladded parking garage.
What about shop drawings? Do you all provide those?
Well, yes, we do offer shop drawings. We also offer all the technical information needed to incorporate mesh systems into design. Our first conversations are typically with the design team by offering the structural engineers all the information they need to design the substructure. We then will, be in contact with the contractors as well as the subcontractors by offering shop drawings, going through and making sure that the hole placement is where it needs to be. That way, when the panels arrive on site, they're exactly, drawn and manufactured and fabricated to the drawings that we provided and that have been approved. We want to make sure that once those panels do arrive on site, that there is absolutely no guesswork or questions that are going to need to be answered. We want the installation to go very smoothly, and the more technical information that we can hash out prior to the manufacturing and fabricating process, the better off we are. Which brings us back to that question, the best thing to do from the beginning is just to get us involved. The more involved we are from the start, the better off the installation will be in the long run, and the better off the project will look.
Great. Our next question is for John or Steve. Where would you all say the biggest cost is when designing and building a parking garage?
Well, I'll take it first, John, if you want.
Okay.
The biggest cost is certainly the structural frame. That's where we spend the most time. It's why we spend the most time also on efficiency of the garage. Basically, the solution that yields the most cars within the least amount of square footage will typically give you the least expensive garage. Now, where that's important in this conversation is that you don't want to use up the entire budget with the concrete and the structural frame if you plan on cladding your garage in metal mesh, glass, or other building materials.
I would definitely agree with that, Steve. And then I would think probably the number 2 biggest cost would be the skin or the facade. So that would benefit if that was taken as a high priority as almost the structure and detailing and getting everyone involved early with that.
Great, thank you guys. We had another question kind of touching on environmentally responsible materials. This is really for anybody, so whoever wants to address it can just jump in. But is sustainability something that comes up a lot with clients, or something that you're seeing a lot when working on parking facilities?
Well, I can take this one. This is Steve. Absolutely is the answer. Really, every building site today is focused on sustainability. It would be delinquent to design a building without taking those factors into shape. With the garage, there's not a whole lot to work with in that it's not a occupied or enclosed environmental building. So the things that we look for are recycled materials, reduction in energy where we can, which is really just the lighting system, pieces and parts like that. You should know that there is a committee called the Green Parking Council, which is very similar to the LEED agency in that LEED has recently not allowed LEED recognition for standalone parking garages. So there is an industry still out there that's looking to recognize green buildings and that environment if you need to get certified.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything?
I was just going to say that even though we haven't seen a lot of LEED certified parking garages in the past, there have been a few, and my guess is that there will be probably more coming up in the future as building codes tend to increase and everyone seems to be more and more concerned with sustainability issues.
Yeah, I agree. There's actually a very long list of what I would call sustainable garages or environmental friendly garages, and it seems to be every one that we do today.
Great, thank you guys. Another question talks about ventilation. You've all talked about airflow and ventilation throughout this conversation. What are some of the best, most cost-effective ways to address this? John, can you answer this?
Yeah. Mostly, there's a real detailed description of it in the building codes, but basically you want to provide a certain percentage openness on opposing sides of the garage, which will allow just natural ventilation to kind of air out the garage. And that will allow you to not put in mechanical systems, which are expensive, and maintenance is, a lot of maintenance involved, and also there are exposed ducts everywhere in the garage, and it just kind of makes the garage environment look kind of cluttery. So that's the way we've achieved that, is either using openness mesh for the facade, or just taking out pieces of, like for example, if you had a polycarbonate or glass facade, just taking out pieces of it to allow the natural ventilation to flow through.
Great, thank you. Steve, how are you all addressing this in a cost-effective manner?
Well, in terms of cost effectiveness, open air and natural ventilation is, the easiest and least cost solution. So keeping the facade as open as possible on all sides is certainly the best way to achieve good ventilation. However, the downside of that is that sometimes is a pretty simple solution. And actually, if you're looking at the screen, the building that's shown is a good example of that. If you can picture that same building without the metal mesh and lights on it, you would have a pretty basic traditional parking garage, which would be very open and vented. In the past, in order to make that more acceptable to the campus or its surroundings, we would do punched openings or brick or concrete or something to infill those openings. The metal mesh that you see on this building is actually a great solution, which gives it that same architectural feel. It's a classy building, and it stays, ventilated naturally.
Great, thank you. And another question, actually, for Wendy is, how much does mesh cost per square foot, and what does that include?
Well, because we offer 100 patterns to choose from, the price will vary. If you're looking at our standard rigid mesh system and our standard mounting system, you can estimate anywhere from $25 to $35 per square foot, and that cost is going to include the mesh, attention profile, our standard hardware system, all of that technical information that we talked about earlier, such as shop drawings, structural calculations, basically everything and every information that you're going to need to know to install those panels to the substructure. There are some cost-saving alternatives that we can explore as well. Because we do design and build all of our own weaving looms, we can manipulate the openings and the wire diameters to create a more cost-effective mesh pattern. And this way the owner is still getting a beautiful garage that meets their budget and all of their other requirements that they may have. And I know, there's some other requirements as far as, being able to modify the mesh opening, and that's absolutely possible. And again, the other advantage of being able to design and build our own loom, we can manipulate the pattern. We can make it more open. We can use a larger or smaller wire diameter, larger or smaller openings, not only meeting the owner's requirements, but then again meeting those cost challenges that may be involved when designing a parking structure that does have a mesh facade on it. And all of those little attributes or all of those little options that we can take to, maybe have some cost-saving alternatives, we will provide those as well. Going back to the cost, one of the cost-saving methods that we have seen lately is being able to design the substructure out of either a painted steel or a galvanized steel. Because we are using an architectural grade 316 stainless steel, the substructure can be made out of either one of those two, whether it's painted or galvanized, and that's going to be a cost savings alternative. As long as there is a protective barrier between our stainless steel and the substructure itself, then we're okay with going, with a lower grade steel to install the panels to. The other option is that we have full height panels, and these panels will run top to bottom. That way you don't have a panel at every level of the parking structure. So you have less substructure, you have less installation time, which is going to lower your cost there. You have less fabrication on those stainless steel panels because now you only have to install one panel versus 4. So some other cost-saving alternatives, there's always ways to explore how to save costs or bring those costs down, especially on a very low budget project that may, still want to have this great building or, this great looking building that has mesh on it, but, may not always have the money or the funds to support that.
Great, thank you so much. And we are going to go ahead and end it there. So thank you so much to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate your time and your feedback. If anybody has any questions that did not get answered, you can contact our sales at wstaylor.com or call 800-321-6188. And just thank you again, everyone. We really enjoyed this, so thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.